"Come on, deaf girl, show us what you got." Those words hung in the air just moments before the Olympic gold medalist turned the entire dojo upside down. Gavin Torres stood in the center of his studio that evening, black belt knotted tightly around his waist, finger aimed straight at the woman holding the mop. His voice rang out across the training floor to the 15 students and their parents, thick with the smug certainty of someone who had never been truly tested. "I said, fight me," Gavin repeated louder now, turning the challenge into a performance. "Or are you too scared and too deaf to even try?" Lena Harper lifted her gaze from the floor, water still dripping from the mop strands in her hands. For 8 months she had been invisible here, arriving after hours to clean, slipping into the shadows, letting everyone assume she was simply grateful for the paycheck. The room fell deathly quiet. Parents shifted in their seats. Students stared. But none of them knew the truth Gavin was about to learn the hard way. Some people choose to be underestimated. 3 years of deliberate hiding were about to shatter in a single burst of undeniable truth. 2 hours earlier, Lena had slipped in through the back door exactly as she did every Tuesday and Thursday. Her key turned silently. She moved through the studio like water, methodical, unseen. The air carried the familiar scent of sweat and effort. Rubber mats covered the floor. Mirrors caught the overhead lights she switched on one by one. She knew the routine by heart. Vacuum first, then mop, then wipe every piece of equipment. It was honest work that paid the rent on her small apartment and kept her hands busy enough to quiet her thoughts. But Lena never simply cleaned. While the vacuum hummed along the edges of the mats, her eyes tracked every technique the evening class practiced. She noticed the brown belt student who always telegraphed his punches, the teenage girl in the back row who had flawless form but never unleashed her full power, the tiny corrections Gavin made to stances that genuinely improved balance. Gavin Torres had real talent, no question. At 28, he had earned his 3rd-degree black belt through honest skill. Students respected him. Parents trusted him with their children. Yet something else lingered in the way he taught, something that made Lena's jaw tighten. The quick dismissal of certain students, the flash of impatience when someone struggled, the jokes that were never quite jokes. Tonight the class was wrapping up when Lena heard car doors slam outside. Through the window, she saw Camila Ruiz walking toward the entrance, her 10-year-old son, Eli, bouncing beside her. Lena knew them well. Eli had started 3 weeks earlier, bright-eyed and eager, his hands flying in rapid sign language as he spoke with his mother. The boy was deaf, just like Lena, but where she had learned to navigate the hearing world through careful observation, Eli still moved with the fearless joy of childhood. The front door chimed. Camilla signed something to Eli, who grinned and dashed onto the mat where Gavin was finishing with the advanced group. Lena saw Gavin's expression shift the instant he noticed them. Not open hostility, but a cold tightening around his eyes. "Mrs. Ruiz," he called, his tone the careful one adults use right before delivering bad news. "I was hoping to catch you." Camilla approached while Eli stretched happily on the mat, unaware of the conversation. "Is everything okay?" "Eli's been looking forward to class all week." Gavin glanced at the boy, then back to the mother. "Look, I've been thinking. This might not be the best fit for Eli." Camilla's voice stayed steady, but her shoulders stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Martial arts needs a lot of verbal instruction. Commands, corrections, safety calls. Eli can't hear any of that." He gestured toward the other students. "It's not fair to him, and honestly, it's a distraction for the rest of the kids." Lena's grip tightened on the mop handle. She had watched Gavin work with struggling students before. The overweight boy who couldn't keep pace, the shy girl who flinched at contact. He had shown patience then, made adjustments, found ways to help them succeed. But he's been doing so well, Camilla said. He follows the visual cues, watches the others. His balance and coordination are actually improving. Mrs. Ruiz, I appreciate your optimism, but this isn't therapy. It's martial arts. Real martial arts demands discipline, focus, the ability to respond instantly to instruction. Gavin's voice carried clearly to the students who had stopped talking to listen. Maybe you should look into one of those special programs, for kids with needs. The word lingered like smoke. Eli, blissfully unaware, kept stretching, his movements surprisingly fluid for a 10-year-old. He doesn't need a special program. Camilla's voice grew firmer. He needs the same chance as any other child, the chance to feel strong, capable. Strong? Gavin let out a short laugh. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel, but let's be realistic. The kid can't even hear instructions properly. How is he supposed to defend himself if he can't hear an attacker coming? That was the moment Lena moved. She had not planned it. 1 second she stood by the supply closet, invisible as always. The next, she had taken 3 steps forward, mop still in hand. Gavin noticed her approach and turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Can I help you with something?" Lena stopped. Conversations around the studio died. Parents and students turned to watch. Even Eli looked up, sensing the change in the air. She met Gavin's gaze directly, her dark eyes steady and unblinking. Then she looked at Eli, who watched the exchange with growing confusion, then back to Gavin. She shook her head once, a small but unmistakable no. "Excuse me?" Gavin's voice rose. "Are you trying to tell me how to run my studio?" Lena did not answer in the way he expected, but her message needed no words. The room felt it. Gavin looked around at his audience, students, parents, all watching this strange standoff between him and the cleaning woman. His face flushed. "This is unbelievable," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Now the cleaning lady wants to coach martial arts." A few awkward chuckles rippled from the students. Camilla's face paled. Eli, reading the tension in their bodies, moved closer to his mother. "Lady, I don't know what you think you know about teaching martial arts," Gavin continued, his voice gaining momentum. "But I've been doing this for 15 years. I have actual credentials, actual experience, not just—" He gestured at her mop. "Whatever this is." Lena's expression never changed. She simply stood there, holding his gaze, holding the space, and that silence somehow made Gavin angrier. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to what he probably thought sounded reasonable, yet every syllable rang clear in the quiet studio. "Look, I get it. You see a kid getting some tough love and you want to help. That's admirable, I guess. But you don't understand what we're doing here. This isn't daycare. This is serious training." Lena remained motionless, hands resting on the mop handle, yet something in her posture had shifted. Where she once folded into herself, now she stood centered and tall. Gavin misread the stillness as surrender. He turned back to Camilla, raising his voice for the whole room. "Mrs. Ruiz, I'm trying to be professional here, but when the cleaning staff starts questioning my methods, that's when—" Eli approached the group. The boy had been reading their faces and bodies, and worry creased his own. He tugged his mother's sleeve and signed rapidly. Camilla's eyes filled with tears as she watched her son's hands. She turned to Gavin, voice thick. "He's asking why everyone looks angry. He wants to know if he did something wrong." Gavin glanced at the boy, and for a split second, guilt flickered across his face. But then he saw the watching parents and students, and his expression hardened again. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, the constant need for special accommodation, the disruption to class flow. Other kids shouldn't have to worry about—" Lena moved. She leaned the mop against the wall and stepped forward, placing herself between Gavin and Eli. Her hands flowed in clear sign language, and Eli's worried face broke into a wide smile. Whatever she had signed, it made the boy stand taller. Gavin stared, mouth slightly open. You know sign language?" Lena looked at him and nodded once. So you've been understanding everything? His voice climbed. This whole time you've been listening to a private conversation between me and a parent? She nodded again. The studio crackled with tension. Parents whispered. Students fidgeted. Marcus Chen, one of the senior brown belts, stepped closer. Sensei Torres, he said quietly, maybe we should... No. Gavin's voice cracked like a whip. This is my studio, my school, and I'm not going to be undermined by... He gestured at Lena with barely contained fury. By someone who mops floors for a living. He turned to the room, playing to his audience. Now, can you believe this? The deaf cleaning lady thinks she knows better than a third-degree black belt. What's next? Should I ask her opinion on our belt testing procedures? A few students shifted uncomfortably. The laughter Gavin hoped for never arrived. Lena stayed calm, but her eyes never left his face. She raised one hand, pointed to herself, then to the mat. The gesture was unmistakable. Gavin's jaw dropped. Are you challenging me? She nodded. This is insane. Gavin ran his hands through his hair, looking around as if seeking allies. She's challenging me to fight. The deaf cleaning lady wants to fight a black belt instructor. But the energy in the room had shifted. Where parents and students had once been uncomfortable, now they leaned forward, watching with new intensity. Sarah Kim, mother of one of the younger children, spoke up. Maybe you should just let it go, Gavin. She's only trying to help. Let it go? Gavin's voice rose to a near shout. She's disrespecting everything we stand for here. You don't just walk into someone's studio and... Lena stepped onto the mat. The action was so simple, so deliberate, that it cut Gavin off mid-sentence. She stood in the center of the training area, her worn sneakers squeaking softly against the rubber. Her faded jeans and plain gray t-shirt looked out of place among the crisp white GEs, yet her stance did not. Gavin stared for a long moment. Conversations died completely. Even the youngest students sensed they were witnessing something important. Fine, Gavin said at last, voice carrying to every corner. You want to do this? Let's do this. He stepped onto the mat, movements sharp with anger and wounded pride. But we're doing this right. Full contact, no holding back, no special treatment because you're deaf or a woman or work here. Lena did not react to his words, but her eyes tracked him with an intensity that made several parents exchange glances. When I win, Gavin announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, and I will win, you pack up your cleaning supplies and find somewhere else to work. Deal? Lena looked around the room, meeting the eyes of students and parents. When her gaze found Eli, the boy watched her with a mix of worry and hope. She nodded to him, then turned back to Gavin. She extended her hand. Gavin looked at it suspiciously. What? Lena gestured from his hand to hers. A handshake. An agreement. You're really going to do this? Gavin's voice carried disbelief and rising anticipation. The cleaning lady really thinks she can take on a black belt. He reached out and grasped her hand, squeezing harder than necessary. Lena did not flinch. But when their hands separated, Gavin flexed his fingers without thinking. Tomorrow night, he told the room. 7 p.m. Full class as witnesses. He turned back to Lena. I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your choices. As he spoke, Marcus Chen had moved closer, studying Lena more carefully. His eyes widened at details others had missed. The calluses on her hands, the way she balanced on the balls of her feet, the controlled breathing that spoke of years of training. Sensei, Marcus said quietly, maybe we should... Tomorrow night, Gavin repeated, cutting him off. 7 p.m. sharp. Don't be late. Lena nodded once more, then walked calmly off the mat. She picked up her mop and returned to cleaning as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed, and everyone in the room knew it. The studio buzzed with nervous energy as word of the coming match spread. Parents gathered in small clusters, voices low but urgent. Students who had been ready to leave suddenly found reasons to stay. Victor Lang, the studio owner, emerged from his office in the back, drawn by the unusual commotion. A stocky man in his 50s with graying temples, he had built Sunset Valley Martial Arts from nothing over 20 years and took pride in running a respectful professional school. "What's going on out here?" Victor's voice carried the authority of someone used to handling teenage egos and worried parents. Gavin straightened, suddenly aware his boss had seen at least part of the scene. "Just a minor disagreement about teaching methods." "A disagreement that involves challenging someone to a fight?" Victor's eyes swept the room, taking in the tense faces and the way people clustered around the mat like spectators at an accident. Marcus Chen stepped forward. "Sensei Lang, Gavin challenged the cleaning lady to a match tomorrow night. Full contact." Victor's eyebrows rose. He looked from Gavin to Lena, who was methodically mopping the far corner, seemingly oblivious to the attention. "Is this true?" "She challenged me first," Gavin said quickly. "She was interfering with how I handle my students, questioning my authority in front of parents. I had to respond." "You had to challenge a deaf woman who works here to a fight?" "She's not just some helpless victim," Gavin answered defensively. "She made her choice. She stepped onto the mat." Victor walked over to where Lena worked. She looked up as he approached, expression neutral but alert. "Lena," Victor said, speaking clearly so she could read his lips, "is this something you really want to do?" She nodded without hesitation. "You understand this could be dangerous?" "Gavin is a skilled fighter." Another nod, even more emphatic. Victor studied her face for a long moment. In 8 months of employment, Lena had been punctual, thorough, and completely professional. Never late, never complained, never caused trouble. Yet something in her eyes now reminded him of fighters he had known in his younger days. A quiet intensity that spoke of serious training. "All right," Victor said finally, turning to the room. "If both parties consent, I won't stop this, but we do it properly." He walked to the center of the mat, voice carrying to every corner. "Tomorrow night at 7 p.m., official match with proper rules and safety protocols. I'll referee personally." Gavin's confident smile faltered slightly. He had expected Victor to shut it down, not legitimize it. "Full contact as agreed," Victor continued, but with reasonable limits. "No strikes to the head, no joint locks, no throws that risk serious injury. First to submit or be unable to continue loses." "That's not what we agreed," Gavin protested. "She challenged me. She should face the real consequences." "These are the real consequences." Victor's voice hardened. "In my studio, under my insurance, with my rules. Don't like it? Take your disagreement to the parking lot." Gavin's face flushed, but he nodded. "Fine. But the stakes remain the same. When I win, she finds another job." Victor turned to Lena. "And if you win?" Lena looked thoughtful for a moment, then walked over to where Eli stood with his mother. She knelt to the boy's level and signed something. Eli's face lit up and he signed back rapidly. Camila Ruiz translated, voice shaky with emotion. "She says if she wins, Eli gets to stay in class. No more talk about special programs or accommodations. He gets treated like every other student, that's it." Gavin laughed. "That's her big demand? The kid can stay in class?" Lena stood and faced him directly. She signed something fluid and decisive. "What did she say?" Gavin demanded. Marcus Chen, who had picked up some sign language from a deaf cousin, translated quietly. She said, "That's everything. The room fell silent again. Parents looked at one another with new understanding. This was not about ego or pride. This was about a child's right to belong. Victor nodded slowly. Those are the terms. 7 p.m. tomorrow. Official witnesses required. I want at least 10 people here to make this legitimate. He looked around the room, expression serious. Anyone who attends is bound by what they see. No social media, no recordings, no gossip that could damage anyone's reputation. This stays between us. Lena removed her cleaning gloves, and for the first time people saw her hands clearly. The calluses were unmistakable, thick ridges across her palms and knuckles that spoke of years spent gripping something far more demanding than a mop handle. Marcus Chen drew in a quiet breath. Those were not the hands of a cleaning lady. Tomorrow, then, Gavin said, trying to keep his voice confident, yet betraying a hint of uncertainty. Don't expect me to go easy on you just because... But Lena had already turned away, returning to her work, as if the conversation were finished. She moved with a fluid efficiency that now seemed purposeful, like someone who knew exactly what she was preparing for. As parents gathered their children and students collected their gear, the studio slowly emptied, but the anticipation remained thick in the air, impossible to ignore. Tomorrow night, everything would change. Lena's apartment sat above a small Korean restaurant on the east side of town, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business and rent stayed affordable. She climbed the narrow stairs, her work clothes still carrying the faint scent of cleaning products, her mind replaying the evening's events. The apartment was sparse, but spotless. A small living room with a second-hand couch, a kitchen table for one, a single bedroom with blackout curtains. Yet it was what wasn't on the walls that told the real story. Picture frames sat face down on the dresser. A small wooden box on the nightstand remained closed. The only visible photograph was on the refrigerator. Lena, with her arm around a younger girl, both grinning at the camera and striking exaggerated muscle poses. Emma. Lena touched the photo gently, the way she did every night before bed. Emma at 14, all elbows and attitude, hearing aids visible but worn like badges of honor. Emma, who had taught Lena that being deaf did not mean being weak, only different. Emma, who had been so proud when her big sister made the Paralympic team. Emma, who was no longer here. Lena moved to the bedroom and knelt beside the bed, reaching underneath to pull out a gym bag she had not opened in 3 years. The zipper stuck slightly from disuse, but inside everything waited exactly as she had left it. Hand wraps worn soft from countless sessions, a mouthguard molded to her teeth, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a gold medal that caught the lamplight like a promise. Rio 2016, Women's Judo, 57-kilogram division, first place. She lifted the medal carefully, feeling its familiar weight. The ribbon was slightly faded, but the gold still gleamed. Lena Harper, Paralympic champion. The deaf girl from Oakland who had shocked the world with her technical precision and devastating ground game. The girl who had retired at 25 after the accident that took her hearing completely and her sister forever. She closed her eyes and the memories flooded back. Not of victory podiums or magazine covers, but of the phone call that changed everything. Emergency room, critical condition, Emma's motorcycle, a distracted driver, a single moment of inattention that destroyed 2 lives in different ways. Emma had been riding to surprise her big sister at training camp. She had just gotten her license and was so excited to finally visit Lena at the Olympic Training Center. The doctor said she had died instantly, as though that were supposed to be comfort. The hearing loss came later, a delayed consequence of the traumatic brain injury Lena suffered when she collapsed upon hearing the news. Sudden sensorineural hearing loss, the doctors called it, stress-induced. Sometimes it returned, they said, Usually it did not. 3 years of silence, 3 years of guilt, 3 years of avoiding everything that reminded her of who she used to be. But tonight, watching Eli's face when Gavin suggested he did not belong, Lena had seen Emma. She had heard Emma's voice in her memory, clear as a bell. "Lena, will you always protect me?" She had failed Emma once. She could not fail Eli. Lena stood and moved to her closet, pushing aside work uniforms to reveal clothes she had not worn in years, athletic wear, training gear, a worn gray hoodie with Team USA printed across the chest in faded letters. She pulled out a pair of training shorts and a compression shirt, holding them up to the light. They still fit. She had never stopped moving, never stopped the quiet training that kept her body ready, even when her mind was not. Shadow boxing late at night in her apartment, stretching routines that preserved flexibility, strength exercises disguised as cleaning work. The muscle memory waited, patient and intact. She walked to the bathroom mirror and studied her reflection. At 31, she looked older than her years. Grief had carved lines around her eyes, and her hair was longer than she had worn it as a competitor. But underneath, the athlete remained. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. She picked it up, expecting spam or a work reminder. Instead, it was from Camila Ruiz. "Thank you for standing up for Eli today. I don't know what you're planning tomorrow, but please be careful. He's been talking about you all evening. Says you're the first adult who treated him like he belonged somewhere." That means everything to a mom. Whatever happens, we'll be there. Lena stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "See you at 7. She returned to the gym bag and pulled out her old training journal, pages filled with technique notes, competition analysis, training schedules written in her careful handwriting. She flipped to a page near the back, one she had written after her last competition. Judo is about more than throwing people. It's about using an opponent's force against them. It's about staying calm when someone tries to overpower you. Most importantly, it's about protecting what matters. I forgot that for a while, but some lessons you never really lose." At the bottom, in Emma's messy teenage scrawl, "My sister is the strongest person I know. Not because she can throw people around, but because she makes other people feel safe. That's her real superpower." Lena traced the words with her finger, feeling their weight. Tomorrow night was not about proving herself to Gavin or even protecting Eli, though both mattered. It was about remembering who she had been before grief convinced her to disappear. She repacked the bag carefully, leaving out only the hand wraps. Those she placed on her nightstand beside Emma's photo. As she got ready for bed, Lena's movements carried a precision they had not held in years. The way she balanced while brushing her teeth, how she unconsciously checked her stance while washing her face, the controlled breathing that steadied her heartbeat. The cleaning lady was still there. The one who had learned to be invisible, who had found safety in being underestimated. But tomorrow night she would step back into the light as someone else entirely. Someone who had forgotten for a while that silence could be its own kind of strength. Someone ready to remember. Before turning off the lights, she sent one more text, this one to Victor Lang. "Thank you for making this official. 7 p.m. sharp." His reply came immediately. "Are you sure about this, Lena? Gavin's good, but he fights angry. That makes him dangerous." She typed back slowly. "I've been fighting angry for 3 years. Tomorrow I fight for something better." Outside her window, the city hummed with late-night energy. Inside her small apartment, surrounded by memories of loss and reminders of who she once was, Lena Harper settled into the deepest sleep she had known in months. Tomorrow, everything would change for everyone. The studio filled differently the following evening. Parents arrived early, claiming seats along the walls, like spectators at a title fight. Students who normally left after class lingered with nervous excitement. Even some afternoon students had returned, drawn by word of mouth and pure curiosity. Lena entered through the back door at the appointed time, carrying a small duffel bag instead of her usual cleaning supplies. She had traded her work clothes for black athletic shorts and a plain gray t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, feet bare. Conversations died as she walked across the floor. Where she had once moved like someone trying to remain unseen, every step now carried purpose. Her posture was straighter, her gaze direct. She looked, several parents realized with surprise, like an athlete. Gavin was already warming up on the mat, movements sharp and aggressive. He wore his crisp white gi with the black belt knotted perfectly. His routine was impressive: high kicks, spinning techniques, combinations that showcased flexibility and power. He was putting on a show, and he knew it. Victor Lang stood at the edge of the mat in his instructor uniform, clipboard in hand, expression carefully neutral, yet his eyes followed Lena with growing interest. "All right, everyone," Victor called out. "We're going to do this properly. Official rules, official witnesses. No phones, no recordings, no social media posts. What happens here stays here." Eli sat in the front row with his mother, eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and worry. As Lena passed near him, she paused and signed something quickly. The boy's worried face transformed into a smile, and he signed back enthusiastically. Marcus Chen, watching from across the room, felt his stomach tighten. He had spent the day thinking about those calluses, about the way Lena had moved during last night's confrontation. Something about her reminded him of his college wrestling coach. That same controlled intensity that spoke of serious training. "Fighters to the center," Victor announced. Gavin strode to the middle with confident swagger, bouncing lightly on his toes, rolling his shoulders. Lena approached from the opposite side, movements economical and fluid. They stood facing each other 3 feet apart. The contrast was striking. Gavin in his crisp white gi, tall and lean with defined muscle built for both function and appearance. Lena in simple workout clothes, shorter and sturdier, her build suggesting functional strength over show. "Standard rules," Victor announced to the room. "No strikes to the head, no small joint manipulation, no throws that risk serious neck or spine injury. Match ends with submission, unconsciousness, or referee stoppage." He looked at both. "Understood?" Gavin nodded curtly. Lena bowed slightly, a gesture so natural it seemed instinctive. "Touch hands and return to your corners." They stepped forward. Gavin extended his hand aggressively, trying to intimidate with grip strength. Lena met it calmly, her own grip solid but not competing. When they separated, Gavin flexed his fingers again. They returned to opposite sides. The room held its breath. "Begin." Gavin came forward immediately, strategy clear. Use reach and aggression to overwhelm her before she could settle. He threw probing punches and kicks, nothing fully committed, just testing reactions. Lena did not retreat. She moved laterally, footwork smooth and balanced, hands up in a guard that looked more like boxing than traditional martial arts, body angled so Gavin's strikes missed by inches. "Come on," Gavin called out, voice carrying to the spectators. "Don't just run around." But Lena was not running. She was reading him. Every time he committed to a technique, she was already moving away. Spatial awareness, letting her see attacks before they fully formed. The first real exchange came when Gavin threw a hard right cross, followed by a low kick. Lena slipped the punch with minimal movement and caught the kick, hands locking around his ankle with surprising speed. For a moment they were connected, Gavin hopping on one foot while Lena controlled the trapped leg. The room expected her to sweep or throw him off balance. Instead, she simply released his foot and stepped back. Gavin landed awkwardly, confidence flickering for the first time. In the crowd, Marcus Chen leaned forward. That hand positioning when she caught the kick, he had seen it in highlight reels of Olympic judo. "What was that?" Gavin demanded, breathing already slightly elevated. You had me, and you just let go. Lena did not respond verbally, but her posture and eyes delivered the message clearly. She was showing him something, giving him information he was not yet ready to understand. Gavin's next attack was more aggressive, a combination of punches followed by an attempt to clinch. But when his hands reached for her, Lena flowed around them like water. Her movement was so smooth, so efficient, that Gavin found himself grasping air while she repositioned behind him. Again she could have struck or thrown him, again she chose not to. The crowd began to murmur. This was not the brutal confrontation Gavin had promised, but something more like a chess match played at fighting speed. Stop playing games! Gavin's frustration built, techniques growing sloppier as anger took over. Fight me! But Lena was fighting, just not in any way he understood. Every exchange revealed more about his patterns, his tendencies, his weaknesses. She was learning him, absorbing his style like data being downloaded. 5 minutes in, Gavin was breathing hard while Lena looked as if she had barely begun to warm up. Sweat darkened his gi. Her shirt remained dry. His movements widened, more telegraphed as fatigue and frustration mounted. The crowd's energy shifted too. Parents who had expected Gavin to dominate now watched with growing amazement as the cleaning lady systematically dismantled his offense without seeming to exert effort. She's making him look silly, Sarah Kim whispered to another mother. Where did she learn to move like that? Gavin heard the whispers and his face reddened. He had promised these people a demonstration of proper martial arts hierarchy. Instead, he was being embarrassed by someone who was not even fighting back. Enough! He roared, abandoning technique for pure aggression. He rushed forward with a wild haymaker, putting all his power behind a punch meant to end it. Lena had been waiting for exactly this. As Gavin committed fully, she stepped off the line of his punch and captured his extended arm. Her movement was so fast, so precise that most spectators missed the technique entirely. One moment Gavin was throwing his biggest punch. The next he was airborne, rotating through space in a perfect arc before landing hard on his back with Lena controlling his arm in a textbook Juji Gatami armbar. The room erupted in gasps and scattered applause. But instead of applying pressure to force submission, Lena held the position just long enough for everyone to see how completely she controlled him, then released his arm and stood. Gavin lay on his back staring at the ceiling, chest heaving. Around the room, parents and students processed what they had just witnessed. That throw had been beautiful, technical, the kind that took years to perfect. Marcus Chen was on his feet now, face pale with recognition. He knew that throw. He had seen it performed by Paralympic champions and Olympic medalists. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Who is she? Gavin rolled to his side, then pushed himself up to his knees. His GE was disheveled, hair messed, breathing labored. But it was his expression that had changed most dramatically, the arrogant confidence replaced by confusion and growing fear. What the hell was that? He gasped. Lena extended her hand to help him up. The gesture was respectful, even gentle. But when Gavin looked into her eyes, he saw something that made him shiver. She wasn't even trying yet, and somehow everyone in the room knew it. Gavin stared at Lena's outstretched hand for a long moment before slapping it away and scrambling to his feet on his own, his face flushed with embarrassment and desperation. "Lucky shot," he panted, adjusting his GI with shaking hands. "You caught me off guard." But everyone had seen the truth. That had not been luck. That had been technical perfection, born of thousands of hours. Muscle memory so deep it operated beyond conscious thought. Victor stepped closer to the edge of the mat, referee instincts alert. The dynamic had shifted completely. Gavin's breathing was ragged, movements frantic, while Lena remained centered and calm. "Gavin," Victor called, voice carrying a warning. But Gavin was past hearing warnings. The whispers from the crowd, The way parents now looked at him with something approaching pity, it was eating him alive. His entire identity rested on being the expert, the authority. Without that, who was he? He came at Lena again, this time abandoning any pretense of technique. Wild swings, desperate grappling, the kind of sloppy brawling that had no place in a martial arts school. Lena absorbed it all with minimal effort. She redirected his punches, stepped away from his kicks, and when he tried to tackle her, she simply was not where he expected. The crowd watched in growing discomfort as Gavin's attacks became more reckless, more dangerous. This was no longer martial arts. This was a man having a public breakdown. "This is embarrassing," someone whispered. "Someone should stop this," came another voice. But Lena seemed to understand something the spectators did not. Gavin needed to reach bottom before he could find his way back up. So she gave him space to fall, space to exhaust himself against her defense. 8 minutes in, Gavin threw a wild right hook that would have seriously injured Lena if it connected. But it did not. She moved just enough to let it pass by her ear, and the momentum of his miss sent him stumbling forward. That was when something inside him snapped. "Fight me!" he screamed, spinning to face her. "Stop hiding! Stop running! Fight me like a man!" The words hung like poison. Parents exchanged shocked glances, students shifted uncomfortably. Even Eli, who could not hear the shouted words, could read the ugly emotion on Gavin's face. Gavin raised his fist again, but this time something different burned in his eyes. Something that made Victor start forward from the edge of the mat. Lena saw it too. The moment frustration crossed into genuine violence, when technique gave way to the desire to hurt. She moved. Not away this time, but toward him. As Gavin's fist came down in a wild, uncontrolled strike aimed at her head, Lena stepped inside his guard and caught his wrist. Her other hand came up and pressed gently against his chest, holding him there in a moment that stretched like eternity. They froze in that position. Gavin's fist trapped inches from Lena's face, her hand resting over his heart. She looked up into his eyes, and for the first time in the match, he truly saw her. Not the black belt, not the instructor, not the authority figure, just Gavin, scared, angry, lost Gavin. Her expression was not triumphant or mocking. It was sad, disappointed perhaps, but also compassionate. She shook her head slowly, a gesture so gentle it was almost maternal. No more. Gavin's face crumpled. The fight left him all at once, like air escaping a punctured balloon. His hand went limp in her grip, and she released it carefully. He stood swaying slightly, chest heaving, tears forming in his eyes. The room was completely silent. Everyone witnessed the collapse of a man who had built his identity on being stronger than everyone else. Lena stepped back and gestured toward the edge of the mat. The match was over. Not because anyone had submitted or been knocked unconscious, but because there was nothing left to fight. Gavin looked around at the faces staring back at him. Students, parents, colleagues, all seeing him as he truly was. He walked off the mat without a word, shoulders shaking. The silence that followed was absolute. That silence stretched, heavy and profound. Gavin stood at the edge of the mat, back to the room, shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. Parents and students waited, unsure whether to leave or stay, to comfort or confront. It was Eli who broke the spell. The 10-year-old stood from his seat in the front row and walked onto the mat. He approached Lena, hands moving in quick, excited sign language. Even those who could not understand sign could read the admiration and gratitude in his expression. Lena knelt to his level, her own hands responding with fluid grace. Whatever they said to each other, it made Eli's face light up with pure joy. The exchange seemed to wake Gavin from his paralysis. He turned slowly, face streaked with tears he had not bothered to wipe. "I'm sorry," he said, voice barely a whisper. The words were aimed at Lena but carried to every corner. Parents leaned forward. Students stopped their quiet conversations. "I'm sorry," Gavin repeated louder this time. "Not just for tonight, for yesterday. For every time I made someone feel like they didn't belong here." He looked directly at Eli, who was still signing with Lena. "Especially you, buddy. You belong here as much as anyone else. More than me, probably." Victor stepped onto the mat, expression unreadable. As owner, he had the authority to fire instructors who embarrassed his school, but he had also seen something tonight that went beyond wins and losses. "Gavin," Victor said carefully, "why don't you take a seat?" Gavin nodded and moved to a bench along the wall, movements heavy with exhaustion and shame. The crowd's attention turned back to Lena, who was still kneeling with Eli. Marcus Chen had been watching the entire exchange with growing recognition. During the match, he had tried to place where he had seen those techniques. Now, looking at the way Lena moved, the way she carried herself, the pieces fell into place. "Lena," Marcus called out, voice uncertain. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up and nodded. "Rio 2016, Women's Judo, 57-kilogram division." Marcus paused, studying her face. "That was you, wasn't it?" The room went electric. Parents who had been reaching for their phones to Google stopped and stared. Students who barely knew what the Paralympics were suddenly understood they were in the presence of something extraordinary. Lena stood slowly, Eli moving to stand beside her. For a moment she looked as if she might deflect the question, retreat back into the anonymity she had cultivated for 3 years. Instead she nodded. "Holy," someone breathed from the back. "Language," a parent corrected automatically, but the voice carried no real conviction. Victor's eyes widened as the implications hit him. "You're Lena Harper, the Lena Harper." Another nod, smaller this time. "But why?" Victor gestured around the studio at the cleaning supplies still sitting by the door. "Why are you here working as—" Lena held up a hand, stopping the question. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of parents and students who had watched her clean their training space for 8 months without truly seeing her. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear, carrying the slight accent of someone who had learned to speak before losing her hearing. "Everyone deserves to feel strong," she said, words coming slowly but with absolute conviction. "Everyone deserves to feel like they belong somewhere." She gestured toward Eli, who beamed up at her. "This young man reminds me why I fell in love with martial arts in the first place. Not for the medals or the recognition, but for what it teaches us about ourselves." Her gaze found Gavin, still sitting on the bench with his head in his hands. True strength isn't about defeating others. It's about protecting those who need protection. It's about creating space for people to discover their own power. Camila Ruiz stood from her seat, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing my son as more than his disability, for giving him a chance to belong." "He always belonged," Lena replied. "Some of us just forgot how to see it." Victor stepped forward, his business owner's mind already processing the implications of having a Paralympic champion in his studio. "Lena, would you consider teaching?" "I mean officially. We could restructure your position, create a program for adaptive martial arts." "I'll think about it," Lena said. "But first there's something else that needs to happen." She walked over to where Gavin sat, hunched on the bench. The room watched as she knelt in front of him, bringing herself to his eye level. "Gavin," she said gently. He looked up, face a mess of tears and shame. "You're a good teacher," she continued. "I've watched you work with students for months. You have genuine skill, real knowledge. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that teaching isn't about being the strongest person in the room." Gavin's voice was hoarse when he spoke. "How do I fix this? How do I come back from what I just did?" "The same way anyone learns martial arts," Lena said. "One day at a time, one student at a time, one choice at a time. She stood and extended her hand to him again. This time, Gavin took it without hesitation, letting her help him to his feet. "I'd like to learn from you," Gavin said, voice growing stronger. "If you'll have me as a student." Lena smiled for the first time all evening. Everyone starts as a beginner, even black belts. Around the room, the tension that had gripped the studio for 2 days finally began to dissolve. Parents relaxed in their seats. Students started talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. Eli bounced on his toes, signing rapidly to his mother about his new hero. Victor clapped his hands once, bringing attention back to himself. "All right, everyone? What we witnessed tonight stays in this room. We're a family here, and families protect each other." He looked at Lena, then at Gavin, then at the assembled community. "Tomorrow we start fresh. New programs, new opportunities, new ways of understanding what it means to be strong." As the crowd began to disperse, people approached Lena with handshakes, thanks, and quiet words of respect. Parents who had barely acknowledged her existence now saw her clearly for the first time. But it was Eli's reaction that mattered most to her. The boy signed something elaborate and enthusiastic, face glowing with excitement. Camilla translated through her tears. "He says you're the first grown-up who fought for him instead of against him. He wants to know if you'll teach him to be brave like you." Lena knelt one more time, meeting Eli's eager eyes. Her response was in sign language, but its meaning transcended words. "You're already brave," she told him. "Now let's learn to be strong." Outside the studio, the world continued its regular rhythm. But inside these walls, everything had changed. A community had remembered what it meant to protect its most vulnerable members. A teacher had learned the difference between authority and leadership, and a woman who had hidden in silence for 3 years had found her voice again. Sometimes the quietest person in the room really does have the loudest message. Sometimes strength isn't about what you can destroy, but what you choose to protect. And sometimes the people who need our help the most are the ones who end up saving us. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of what happens when truth meets visibility. At Beat Stories, we believe exposure is the first step to transformation. Subscribe and stay tuned, because the next story might be yours.